Hi, I'm Sumit Bose, and this is the Net Hero podcast. Who's it for? It's for you. If you care about the planet and you care about business. We believe that businesses are responsible for a lot of the damage that has been done to the planet, but they're also responsible for finding the solutions. We need innovation, we need ideas, we need people who are trying to make a difference, and that's what this podcast is about. If you know someone who is trying to make a change, then get them to come along on the podcast. Listen in every week, subscribe, and make sure that you follow us on social media. Our two news platforms, Energy Live News and Future Net Zero, cover everything we do. And this episode is recorded live, so enjoy.
Now, volcanoes, I love them. They blow things up. And that's my thought about geothermal power. I always thought, you need a volcano. And I've seen it in Iceland and that's it. But the UK has just opened its first geothermal power plant in Cornwall. Now, that is no place, if I remember my geology, there aren't many volcanoes down there. It's actually using water. So some people are saying geothermal is something that we could use much more. It's a renewable energy source. It's one that doesn't have as massive a footprint, for example, as building a nuclear power station. It's always on. And it's something you can use. It's also got a track record. Others say it's just a folly. You might get the odd plant, but really, are they in the right places? Talk about the infrastructure. So is geothermal energy something, the UK can look at properly, but also globally? That's what I'm going to discuss today. And my guest today is a super geothermal scientist, Dr. Laura Chiamonte, and she's from an organisation called EPRI, which is a research institute, not for profit. That's right, Laura, isn't it? Not for profit. And you've been going, I think, for about sort of 50 years. So before we get into what we're talking about, geothermal, what does EPRI do? What's your sort of modus operandi? What are you about?
All right. So first of all, thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Excited to hear that you are excited about geothermal. And to answer your question, so EPRI is an independent research institute, non-for-profit, and we are member funded. We work with 400 companies around 40 countries, and basically we do research and development on everything related with energy for an affordable and reliable energy future.
So you work with governments as doing, but you also work with commercial clients, sort of.
Correct. We have industry, governments, and most of it is companies. We believe that industry should be very involved in shaping this the future of energy, of course.
How independent are you? Because it's always difficult, isn't it? I know, but a company commissions you, goes, I want to do this. Hey, can you do the science and prove it's okay? And then you say, actually, it's not okay.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So our mandate is a very strong objectivity. We are type of a non-profit entity that actually cannot advocate. So we are not advocates. Our motto is like all of the above. We need to understand everything to make sure that we incorporate all the forms that are actually going to make an impact for this affordable and reliable food future, right? So we have boards, which are a part of these companies that are providing funding, but also we have independent boards that inform some of the directions, et cetera, to make sure that this objectivity is achieved.
Right. So what you're giving them is the actual science. You're going, right, here's the stuff. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
And your background, I mean, it's fascinating. So you're from Argentina, right?
That's correct.
Or Argentina. Hey.
Argentina, yes.
Then, obviously, I know it's got a few sort of mountains and stuff, but so what got you into sort of geothermal? What got you into sort of geology in the first place?
Well, so actually, that's a good question. If I have to be honest, what it got me into geology is when I heard that the geologists spend a lot of time in the mountains working. So that was kind of like, okay, let's see what this is. This is my honest answer. But
you like the outdoor fresh air, yeah?
I like camping. I like the outdoor. I like the mountains, definitely. Yes. But then I thought it was fascinating. I started, many years ago in Argentina, and I actually started my career as in the oil and gas. because geology is one of the best ones. So I started also developing interest for energy in general, and I like, this is a personal road. I started trying to move to cleaner and cleaner, and I work on always related with specific things about geology, which is geomechanics and structural geology. But then, so I moved to some other little steps for cleaning and more sustainable energy. But then at the end, I focus on geothermal, which I think explains, that could help part of what we are trying to look for, this reliable and affordable.
It's funny because I've spoken to quite a few people on this podcast over the years, and they often start in oil and gas,
Yeah.
and then they switch because whatever people say and criticize it, it's been a brilliant, brilliant way for people to learn about the planet. The geology, the research that oil and gas has done over the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And without that, we wouldn't be here anyway, would we? Really?
Exactly, and also, for everywhere where you look at it, right? They have drilled so many wells, if you want to put it like that. That's the most direct way of understanding what is in the subsurface, and there is a vast amount of knowledge that we can use for other type of applications that involve the subsurface. And of course, given the oil and gas and industry that grow out so, I wouldn't say grow up so fast, but that their innovation pace is quite fast because they have a very, very big business need. There are a lot of things that could actually be applied to geothermal that could help expedite where we are right now.
We're looking at a global shift, even though people are saying it's slow, but it is happening. Oil and gas companies are buying different kinds of energy companies. They're building renewables. They're building solar storage. And in a way, I suppose the way I see it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong and explain to our listeners, but is geothermal the closest to kind of what oil and gas is? Because in a way, we've heard of fracking and things like that. You drill a hole and you get some energy. So in a way, a pivot for an oil and gas company is they're drilling for like black stuff and then they drill for water or whatever. So what I'm trying to get to, if you said to me, okay, I take an oil and gas company, it's quite hard for them to suddenly become a renewables company or to start doing solar and doing that. But would a transition into geothermal energy be a little bit easier because it's kind of similar sort of exploration?
Yes, definitely. What you're saying there, it's if there is something that the oil and gas to start on geothermal project that is very important is that they understand the subsurface.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are not exactly the same type of rocks than geothermal, but one key thing is like they understand the risk about not being able to see what's under your feet, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, every type of energy, cleaner energy that if you are talking about them transitioning to renewables, any type of cleaner energy that involves the subsurface, another example is natural hydrogen, geologic hydrogen.
Yeah.
So the oil and gas is well positioned to tackle these type of projects.
All right. I said at the beginning, slightly tongue in cheek, but I did really think geothermal was only where there's volcanoes, right? Because I went to Iceland, I saw it, there's geysers and, boiling mud and all of that. So Can you explain, for an idiot like me, what is geothermal energy? And is it about volcanoes or not?
It is, but not only.
Okay.
Yeah. So the beauty of geothermal is that basically what you are trying to do is use the heat that is already in the earth, right? So if you could eventually drill into the mantle, you will have the same temperature. Sorry, on the center of the earth, you will have almost the same temperature that the surface of the sun, right?
Crazy.
So there is plenty of heat under.
Yeah.
So geothermal is a big word that encompasses many things, but one of the things like conventional geothermal or hydrothermal is a very mature technology that has been going on for generation electricity since like 100 years, right? And it's very well known. But how that happens is because that heat that is everywhere in the subsurface is actually very close to the surface in certain regions that are the volcano type of region.
Okay, so it is volcano, you're right.
It is volcano. So traditionally, this conventional geothermal is in the areas where the heat, you can find it closer to the surface. There is a lot of water. The rock is very broken, so this water can circulate inside the rocks, get heated, and when you extract it to the surface, you can generate electricity. So if you see in a map in the world where these conventional geothermal technologies have been going on for the last 100 years, is in this ring of fire, right? A lot of volcanoes, a lot of natural earthquakes, because there is plate tectonic boundaries and a lot of activity. So this, like the magma or the heat is very close to the surface, so it's cheap to drill and get it. So now what is this second phase? Well, if you talk with veterans of the industry, there are many phases, right? But this
Right.
big phase that we are saying about the growth geothermal is that a lot of this innovation that is rapidly moving is making it available for you to go deeper and away from these areas of volcano and activity and plate boundaries to actually find this heat, right? If I can say something very quickly, it's like conventional geothermal needs three elements. You need to have the heat, you need to have fluids to extract this heat, and you need to have permeability, which is these broken parts, pores, or little fractures in the rock in order for this fluid to circulate. So now what happens? If you move away from these areas, the volcanoes, the ring of fire, the heat is there because it's everywhere in the subsurface, but perhaps you don't have the so much fluid and you don't have the rocks so broken in order for that, right? So this is what it started this new wave in which you can engineer the subsurface to make sure that you can replicate a system in which you can extract this heat to generate electricity. And the way you do that is either injecting fluids if they are not there, and also breaking the rock in order for this fluid to be able to circulate and harness the heat.
Can I clear something up? Is geothermal energy about the water, right? So you're not using lava, right? You don't use lava. So it's just basically because the earth is so hot in those traditional places, the water that trickles down gets hot, and that's what comes up. So when you're talking about where you're not in this ring of fire, where you're moving to other places, like the Cornwall one, for example, is that water around the whole planet then? This hot water is always under our feet?
No, there are regions, there are different levels, and there are regions that they have much less heat. And to your question about whether geothermal is all about the water, this is something important and very, very important to understand, is like the water is the medium in which you can actually extract this heat from the subsurface and bring it to the surface and generate electricity.
Right.
But it's not the only way. The thing is, water or certain fluids are the most effective, right? There is another part of this new next generation geothermal, which is called advanced geothermal or closed loop, in which you actually, like the proposition is that you drill wells and you have a isolated pipe, so you don't produce water or don't use this water to harness the heat. You just have one fluid inside this pipe that goes down, gets heated, and then you can generate the electricity with that. However, and that's why the water question is important, is because the rocks are more insulators. They are not, they don't transmit the heat so easily as water. So those systems are less efficient, and that's why you have to sometimes drill much longer wells in order to be able to harness this heat.
So what you're saying is that in the ring of fire zones, the heat is closer to the surface and easier to extract. In these places, you see, I thought the rock would always be hot, but I see what you're saying. Yeah. So some places the rock's not as hot, so you have to go deeper down to get it.
Yeah. That's a very important point. So there is something called the geothermal gradient, right? So I started talking about the center of the earth. So that is super hot, and then it gets, this towards the surface, we are losing that heat, right?
Yeah.
So that heat distribution is measured with a gradient. How hot is like 1 kilometer down, 2 kilometers down, etc.
Okay.
But the layers of the earth and also the heat is not uniform. So there are some areas, for example, where you have this magma that starts, going up, and there are this discontinuity. So that's where you get the heat closer to the surface. And there are some other areas that in order to find the same heat, you have to drill much deeper. So that is not uniform. That is the geothermal gradient. And one important thing that I didn't mention yet is that another innovation that is helping a lot the growth of geothermal now is the ability to drill deeper and cheaper and faster, which is happening around the world.
So you look at a place like Iceland, where I've seen it, right? I mean, the traditional. And people always thought it makes sense. Hawaii, Iceland, parts of South America, where, like you said, around the Pacific, these things are there. You said the industry has been going about 100 years, right? When do you know where it first sort of started and how people worked it out? Because it's quite an interesting one. Because I assume people have seen like hot rock pools, but to work out you could make energy is quite clever.
Yeah. So I think so like there are but how do you say it in the hot springs or
Yeah,
the
hot
bath,
springs. Yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
people knew from ever that there are hot water some areas and
yeah.
etc. And this was in Larderello in Italy, where they actually
Oh,
they had this thing hot springs or hot water at the beginning, and they actually started the first commercial power plant electricity was there.
no way. In Italy, that's
Yes,
hilarious.
yes, yes.
I thought it'd been in America or something like that. And so you said a couple of things before we talk about the new stuff. It's traditionally been effective. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how efficient is it? How much do you get out? And the next one I want to ask you is, how safe has it been? Because that's the thing that if it's been 100 years, sure, there's been a few accidents, but on those two things, how efficient is it in terms of getting heat and
Mhm,
generating electricity? So do you
mhm.
get like 10% generation out of the heat you take or more?
So the efficiency from the heat is quite low, but but you have increase in like a huge amount of heat, right? But once
Right.
you are in your plant in your power plant and generating electricity, you have a capacity of almost 90%. So it's really
Oh,
is 75 is an average in the world if you count when they are offline and this and that, but it's a very very efficient way. And then regarding safety, so one of the, for example, because it's a firm base load, clean type of energy is
yeah,
a lot of time compared with nuclear, where
of
nuclear
course.
you have the wave, but of course in geothermal you don't have that. In this next generation, geothermal is one way of engineering the subsurface and creating this fracture is something that is coming from the oil and gas, which is fracking, which
Yeah,
in some areas of the world, how they are very used to do it, shale gas in the US and other areas, etc. And some other parts of the world are very worried about it, right?
yeah. In Britain, for example, yeah.
Well, yeah, in Europe especially, yes. So it could happen. It could happen. You're most likely you're gonna be generating microseismicity, which is barely felt or very low seismicity. But with all the
Which is
shell
little tremors, then basically.
little tremors,
Yeah,
yes. Sometimes, like most of the times, you don't feel it, and if you feel it, it's very 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 low, and pose no danger at all.
yeah,
But luckily for geothermal, for next generation geothermal, there was the shale gas industry before, developing, which is kind of a good equivalent. And they learned a lot about that, because
wow.
they, like most of the, one important thing to notice is that one of the main induced seismicity that came from shale gas was not for the creating these fractures or fracking, but actually for reinjecting the wastewater, right? So that was a different system, the fluids.
Yeah, the fluids. Yeah.
So that's one thing. And then the important topic for us is that has generated an amount of research and work and developments about how to monitor and how on which type of protocols you need to follow in order to avoid that, right? So there are even like there's a huge real-time monitoring system. So you are following, if you are creating these micro earthquakes, you identify when they are getting a little bit bigger, and if they are aligned in certain direction, you could infer that there is a fault there. So therefore, you modify your operations in order not to trigger it, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that most people talk about regarding the safety. And another one, but it's less so for next generation. But when you have this image of the volcano, you have these papers and
Yeah.
sulfuric acid, etc. Right? So that is one of the problems there. But the industry has been working a lot. They make sure that they can work with these and contain those gases.
Right.
The problem there is that those gases do affect the material of the power plant, etc. Right? So it's an added cost, but less so as a safety.
You talk about the one thing that people have always said about fracking is, and scientifically, it's that sometimes it leaks into the water table and all of that. From the new geothermal that we were talking about, and maybe I've got it wrong, but you describe you drill a hole, you drill a pipe, and the latent heat warms up that pipe, and there's a fluid circulating, and then up it comes back, and then you get a turbine, right? If
Mhm.
I've got that right, I think
Yeah.
that's. Is there any like fracturing of the rock, like you mentioned? So, are there fluids being put down? Is there any risk in this geothermal science as we're doing that we start to pollute the water table, for example?
Okay, so just one thing, it's true for shale gas as well as for geothermal. The water table is like a few hundred meters below, depending, 10 meters or so
Yeah,
below
yeah.
us, right? When you are drilling for these geothermals or for gelsa, usually you are drilling at 2 kilometers.
Oh, wow.
The UK project is at 5 kilometers. So you are talking about like many, many kilometers below the
Way
surface,
away from the water.
way
Yeah,
away from the water table.
yeah.
So for water table issues, you have to make sure that your wellbores are well isolated, and that is a quality, right? It's not a risk of what you are doing. It's just make sure that the wells that you are using, they have a good quality and that you are isolating your water table. So if you are using this fluid to frac and to generate fractures in the subsurface, the one of the issues will be what type of fluid you are using, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But most of the time for geothermals, you're using water, or you have to be careful about these type of things, but definitely not in the water table.
You look at Cornwall, right? And maybe you can explain that one to our viewers and listeners. So, from what I understand, the company they've been working on it for several years, and they've now got down, as you said, to about 5 kilometers down. So, is this one of these new plants? And what are they doing? So, are they drilling down and they've just found hot rock, or where they've got to is there water, which is still warming up this pipe? How is it working there? Or maybe you don't know the specifics, but you know what I mean, what I'm trying to get to.
For what I know, I don't live in the UK, so I've been following
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah,
very closely that, but I haven't worked specifically in that project. But my understanding is like what they are doing is they are going after fault zone, what they call it in granites, right?
right.
So what does that do? I mean, they are going at a depth in which they can find the temperature necessary for power generation, and by targeting a fault zone, if what I've been reading, about this is what the project is, they get this broken rock, if you want, right?
Okay.
So those fault zones in the subsurface is usually like conduits for these waters that are underwear,
Ah,
which water is we use the term brine, right? Because it's very salty water.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
not good for drinking.
No, no.
So by reaching this, by targeting these fault zones, they make sure that they have this permeability or these conduits for these natural brines to flow through, harness the heat, and then bring it to the surface to generate electricity.
Obviously, the world is different in different places, like you said. So, a couple of questions that come to mind.
Yeah.
How much heat do you need to have to make this work? So, how hot does it have to be for geothermal to be worth doing?
This is a very big question, right? Because geothermal, you could actually use the heat for many things. So, like one of the things for geothermal is like there is a continuum of applications that you can do. Obviously, for the biggest impact for the future, of energy is power, right?
Right,
But even if you go with lower temperatures, you could use that for heating, direct heating, or heating and cooling
right.
district or cities. That is also a very important application.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
then eventually you can use it for industrial heat or even for, greenhouses, etc. But for power generation, you most likely, like, certain power plants can work with 100 degrees Celsius.
Oh, that's a lot less than I thought.
Yes, but
Ah,
that is also an economic question, right? Because
right.
those plants are usually the most expensive. So if you are actually drilling very deep to extract, all these and and use these power plants that are more expensive, and you only, like with 100 degrees Celsius, you create much less electricity than with hotter system. That system is not going to be economically that
Gotcha.
attractive, right?
Right.
So one of the promises of geothermal, the holy grail, if you want, is something called super hot rock geothermal. Because
Ah,
if you are able to drill so deep to encounter, and you have materials for the drilling and for the monitoring of what you are doing drilling down there, in order to be able to encounter the region that is called supercritical fluid temperatures, that is above like 370
oh,
Cs or
wow.
350,
Yeah.
then the enthalpy of your fluid, I mean your capacity, your heat capacity, and your capacity of generating electricity goes like exponent, well, 5 or 10 times more than a normal well, right?
Wow.
So then your economic equations
Makes sense. Yeah.
starts making sense, right? So Going back to your question is, while you can start generating electricity at 100 degrees, you want it hotter. And going hotter is the goal, because that is more, it makes more sense.
I mean, this is probably stupid, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Does it ever run out? Does it stop?
In principle, no, I don't think we're going to deplete the surface. What it could happen is that you are not so for example, imagine that you have these fluids that they are extracting this heat. If you run it too much, or too much water, or certain, equilibrium in the reservoir, you could deplete an area and you start producing less hot water.
Oh, so that's interesting.
But if you have there are many ways that you can manage that, and you can, generate, focus your production in other areas and let this heat replenish the rock or reheat the rock in a way, and then go back to that area. So it's not that.
Okay. So a bit like an oil well can eventually get dry. You could be in a hot zone, and it could get cooler.
It could cool down, but temporarily. I mean, in a what is temporary is the key question, right?
20 years.
But in an oil well, you could exploit all the oil in the reservoir, and then you don't have more oil, right?
Correct. Yeah.
In the rock down there, that the heat is there. So the question is, like, you could, yes. So you could cool down locally one region, but eventually can replenish.
So in terms of this whole thing about being a reliable, clean energy source that will not, people can see the sun is there, you can see tides, they're always going to happen. Would you say geothermal is in that same vein? It will just keep going on. It may get cooler and then it will just keep reheating. So you've got perpetual power source.
Yes, and to be fair, for example, in the next generation geothermal, that is one of the big questions. Like, once you have a project, how long is that project gonna perform as you predicted? Because the long-term heat replenishing or heat extraction is still under investigation, right? That's a key question. But at the same time, that could be an economic question, because in the worst case scenario, if you develop a field and you say, I need X number of wells to extract all the heat in this area, and then all of a sudden your area is getting colder than you expected faster, instead of like 25, 30 years, you are seeing that it gets colder at 20 or something. The other option is you drill additional wells to get the heat, right? So it's more expensive, but it's not that you are not getting the energy that you projected.
A couple of quick ones before we finish. So when I went to Iceland, I saw that there's a famous place now. It's called the Blue Lagoon, right? So they had a geothermal plant, and then they've got all the hot water, and everyone goes splash. It was fantastic. But that's quite a big building. It was quite a big building. So again, how big is the footprint for these things? Because people can imagine a power station, right? They know what a big coal power station or a nuclear power station. So are these things really big, or are they the size, for example, of a supermarket, or what sort of size can they be to be commercially worth doing to generate enough power?
It depends a lot on the technology, and there are with this next generation geothermal, there are coming a lot of innovation, and they are talking about modular systems in which you can incorporate and vary. But overall, geothermal is one of the advantages is that it uses much less land than other type of technologies, right?
Okay, right.
So the power plant might be big. I think, like maybe supermarket size could be what you saw in Iceland and stuff like that. But overall, the system that you need, the power plants, and because everything is under the earth, etc., you need the surface area that needed is one of the advantages for geothermal.
How much do you think it would, say if this happens, we do get this growth in this new geothermal. There's always people who say it's not good for the environment, all of that. What would your scientific opinion be about kind of the carbon footprint of these things? So, for example, do they need a lot of concrete? Do they need a lot of steel and all that? And would they be, but once you build them, they last like a nuclear power station, 60, 80 years. So I'm trying to get that feel of kind of, you talk about the economics of it. These are all part of it. Is it good? Will it harm the environment for a long time? And does it take a lot of embedded carbon? What are the plants doing now? How long do they sort of last, and what effect do they have?
So the plants last, I think they are equivalent to other power plants, and they last for a long time. Usually, in economic terms, people talk about geothermal projects maybe like in the 30 years, just to
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
it's
yeah.
25, 30 years. There are all these, construction materials, and that's a good question. Like I don't have on top of my head the comparison of everything.
Yeah.
But one of the key things is like you are using less land. This is a very important one. And then the other thing is that you are not emitting, you know, uh,
Ah,
from
gotcha.
from the energy source, right? So on those areas, you are having a free, yeah. So and actually, geothermal is considered, a firm, clean, reliable source of energy.
How do they know where it is? So in Cornwall, I assume they must have done some studies, but I mean, you can't take the temperature of the Earth 5 kilometers
Yeah.
down. So is it just using charts, or how do people know where these zones are?
That is a big question, a good question, and that is, that
Or is it like finding gold in the old
it
days?
is, well, gold is usually in the old days is at the surface, right? And this is
Right.
in the subsurface. So it's more finding like oil in the
Yeah,
early
yeah.
ages and even now, right? It's something underground. So there are these gradients, geothermal gradients that I mentioned. You start measuring it, all in different regions, and there you're going to compare. Even if you are much shallower than the areas that you need to create to go, you still start comparing that there are regions that are hotter than other ones, right? So that gives indication. In the case of the conventional geothermal, you could have these surface expressions that there are hot springs and things like that.
Right.
And there are also indirect measurements of magnetic, like where when
Um,
you have hot areas, your magnetic response of the rock or gravimetric response could be different. So there are those general surveys that you could be doing. And it's like a lot of the subsurface exploration, in which you have to put together a series of indications and a series of indirect exploration techniques in order to try to find, potential areas.
if you look at the world, I mean, basically, most people get it that oil is, oil and gas, they're coming from dead plants in certain areas. There used to be massive forests, particularly where now we have the Middle East, etc. Prehistoric forest, and that's it. With this energy, and you said right at the beginning, it's all around the earth, right? So,
Mhm.
is the potential for geothermal that it's not just regional? It could be in different countries, and it could be in one country in different places. So, for example, we might be able to do it in Cornwall, but we can't do it in, Sussex or Scotland. I don't know. So I assume it's very young science now. You're still trying to do this, but is there a geothermal zone, like you said, the Ring of Fire, or does it not matter for this new type of geothermal?
So in principle, I mean, what the slogan, if you want, is that geothermal is everywhere, right? Because you have
Right.
the heat.
Okay.
And one of the limitations for that is how deep you can drill for heat, to finding this heat. So
Okay.
the zones, I mean, there are areas that are better for geothermal now because they are closer to the surface, right? So ring of fire, you have it almost at the surface, right? You have volcanoes,
Yeah.
etc. So there are certain regions also that you have hotspots that they call it, or that this irregularity structure of the
Yeah.
earth that
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
mentioning. So you are going to have areas like, for example, if we look at the United States, if you if people are following geothermal, next generation geothermal, you might have heard about Fervo Energy, which is doing like these new EGS, enhanced geothermal systems in the US. There are many more companies, but this one is the one that started it. Not started it, that is making the big steps right now.
Yeah.
So those are in Utah and Nevada area in the
Okay.
US, because it's well known that there are a lot, like there are hot areas around the 3-5 kilometer depth,
Right.
right? So there is a concentration of good places at current drillable depths that you could go after. And each country is going to have, in Africa, Kenya is doing a lot, and
Yeah.
etc.
Would it be that classic thing of, obviously, if it's hot area, the Saudi desert, they might have it because it's hot. Utah and Nevada's hot. But if you went up to, I don't know, Vermont or something, it's raining and wet. I don't know. So is it as simple as kind of where it's hotty, dry, that kind of place you'd find it? Or could you find it in places with lots of forests, the Amazon, the kind of, wherever, I don't know, places that are cold. Britain, for example, we've got it now.
Yes,
So.
yes. No, so definitely. So the hot areas for geothermal is the hot areas in the subsurface. So it's completely decoupled from the surface.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that can be anywhere then.
Anywhere, yeah. Iceland is very cold in the winter, right? And they have all this
Very
heat.
true. So in terms of for the UK, just to end with, we've got this first plant. Obviously, it's a bit of a test, and the government are going to look at it. Energy companies are going to look at it and see. But what would you say for people who are thinking, what is the point of geothermal? Is it a good energy source, and can it be scaled to provide us enough power?
So I think there are some estimates that they talk about, like maybe up to the potential of 25 gigawatts of potential for electricity in the UK. But you have to keep in mind that these estimates are, very uncertain. There is not a lot of information, and sometimes are very optimistic, right? I do think that more information is needed to really understand what will be the potential. And also something that is super important is that if the temperatures that are economically accessible are not that great for power, they could be fantastic for other direct applications like heating and cooling, right? So if you ask me, I think there could be a lot of potential, like exactly how does that look like and what is going to be for power or other applications. There are estimates out there, but definitely there is more need for more projects.
Is it, you mentioned Africa there just a moment ago. Is it something really at present that's only really in developing nations, or could it be something that happens in nations all around the world, even in poorer countries?
Oh, it could happen everywhere. I mean, and especially like, for example, in developing countries, I can think about the areas where they are isolated and they don't have a lot of infrastructure. They could, work there. One of the problems for the geothermal is that you need a high upfront capital. And then there is this risk, the subsurface risk that I mentioned. So one of the disadvantages in developing nations is that who's going to provide that capital, right? Because it's expensive to start it.
Yeah. And the last one is, you look at wind turbines and people know you have them offshore, then you have to run a big cable onshore, then pump it into the grid. With these things, is that the same thing? So the power plant will generate, but you'd need a cable to connect it. And that might be, the geothermal could be a long way away from any kind of, base power station, do you know what I mean? Or the grid.
Yeah. So before geothermal, the conventional geothermal, it was a niche technology. I mean, as I mentioned, it was mature for a long time, but it was niche because it was very located to specific area. The promise of this next generation is that you can actually get it closer to the grid, etc. However, even that, for data centers, geothermal is becoming a very attractive option because you can actually co-locate your data centers where they are, and you don't need to connect geothermal to the grid. It's not that simple, but just, in a nutshell, that's another option.
No, so it's really interesting. Listen, I think we're out of time, but Laura, thanks for getting up very early to do this. I really appreciate it. Fantastic stuff. And the website for your organization?
EPRI.com, EPRI.com.
And you got some stuff on geothermal there, so if anyone's been inspired to get a hard hat and join you.
We have about all the research that that we do and including geothermal.
Well, listen, Laura, thank you so much for this. I think you've really given me I feel like I need to go and get a hat now and a lamp and go and start digging up. Thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Brilliant. Audience, tell us what you think about geothermal power. Get in touch on social media. My thanks to Sohi for production this week. See you on the next Net Hero podcast.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.